At some point in life, usually late at night or during an unexpected moment of silence, a strange question appears. Not loud, not dramatic, but persistent. Is this really it? Not, am I successful? Not, am I happy? But something deeper and more unsettling. Am I becoming who I could be? This question is the true entrance to Maslow's pyramid. Not the bottom, not the top, but the invisible doorway most people never notice. Abraham Maslow never intended his theory to be a motivational poster or a checklist for achievement. What he tried to describe was a psychological journey, a slow, often painful movement from survival to meaning, from fear to authenticity. The popular version of the pyramid suggests that once basic needs are met, we automatically climb upward. Food, safety, love, esteem, and finally, self-actualization. But Maslow himself later admitted this interpretation was dangerously simplified. Most people do not climb, they oscillate, they get stuck, they build comfortable rooms on the middle floors and call it a life. Self-actualization was never meant to be a reward at the end of success. It was meant to be a state of being that fundamentally changes how a person experiences reality. To understand what truly sits at the top of the pyramid, we must first understand the hero of the story. And the hero is not an exceptional genius or a monk on a mountain. The hero is an ordinary person who has learned how to survive, but feels quietly empty. Act 1 begins here. Our hero has food, shelter, stability. The nervous system is no longer screaming. Life appears functional. On the surface, everything is fine. Yet something feels off. Achievements bring relief, not fulfillment. Praise feels good, but only briefly. Love is desired, but often feared. This is the stage Maslow called deficiency motivation. Life is driven by lack. You work to avoid pain. You build relationships to avoid loneliness. You seek approval to avoid shame. Even love at this level is often transactional. I will be lovable if I perform correctly. Most people live their entire lives here. The problem is not weakness. The problem is adaptation. The human nervous system is brilliant at survival, but terrible at recognizing when survival is no longer the main task. So even when danger disappears, the strategies remain. Anxiety becomes background noise. Control becomes identity. Busyness becomes a shield against emptiness. At this stage, the pyramid is not a ladder upward. It is a cage. Then something happens. Not a dramatic collapse, not necessarily trauma, but a crack. A loss, a failure, a burnout, or sometimes success itself. The hero reaches a goal and realizes it didn't deliver what was promised. The reward feels hollow. The applause fades too quickly. This is the moment Maslow believed was essential. Disillusionment. Because self-actualization does not begin with confidence. It begins with disappointment. Act 2 begins when the hero stops asking, "How do I get more?" and starts asking, "Why does this not satisfy me anymore?" This question is dangerous. It threatens identity. It destabilizes familiar motivations. The old rules stop working. Fear-based goals lose their power. External validation feels strangely irrelevant, even exhausting. Maslow observed that individuals approaching self-actualization undergo a profound shift in values. They stop organizing life around approval and start orienting around truth. Not moral truth, but experiential truth. What feels real, alive, meaningful? This is where the popular pyramid fails, because at this point, the hero does not feel higher. They feel lost. Self-actualization is not a peak. It is a reorganization of the entire inner landscape. Maslow studied people like Albert Einstein Eleanor Roosevelt, and unknown individuals who lived quietly but authentically. What he found shocked psychologists of his time. These people were not perpetually happy. They were not free from anxiety. They were not always socially smooth or emotionally comfortable. But they shared something rare. They were no longer pretending. Self-actualized individuals experience reality more directly, less filtered through fear, ego, or social performance. They are more comfortable with ambiguity, less obsessed with image, more capable of solitude, less reactive to criticism. They do not ask, "How do I look?" They ask, "Is this true?"
This shift marks the transition from deficiency motivation to being motivation. Instead of acting to fill a hole, the hero begins acting to express something already alive inside them. At this stage, creativity emerges, not as artistic talent, but as a way of relating to life. Self-actualized people do not necessarily paint or write. They approach problems creatively. They improvise. They respond instead of react. Maslow called this freshness of appreciation, a childlike ability to experience ordinary moments as meaningful, not because life becomes magical, but because perception becomes less numb. Ironically, this often happens after suffering, because suffering strips away illusions. The hero begins to notice something unsettling. Many of the rules they lived by were never real. They were inherited fears, cultural scripts, survival strategies mistaken for personality. Letting go of them feels like death. This is why self-actualization is rare. Here, the hero enters the core conflict of Act 2, authenticity versus belonging. Maslow observed that self-actualizing individuals often feel somewhat alienated, not lonely, but separate. They can love deeply without needing constant approval. They can disagree without needing dominance. They can be alone without panic. But this comes at a cost. When you stop performing, you stop fitting neatly into expectations. The hero must decide, remain accepted or become real. This decision is not made once. It is made daily. As the hero continues, something unexpected happens. Meaning replaces motivation. Life is no longer about climbing, it is about alignment. Maslow later expanded his theory to include something even higher than self-actualization, self-transcendence. This is the part most people never hear about. At the true top of the pyramid is not the self. It is the dissolution of obsession with the self. Act 3 begins here. Self-transcendence occurs when personal growth stops being the center of life. When the question shifts from "Who am I becoming?" to "What wants to express itself through me?" This is not spirituality in the mystical sense. It is psychological maturity. The hero experiences moments where the ego quiets. During deep focus, love, service, creativity, or awe. Maslow called these peak experiences, brief states of unity, clarity, and deep rightness. In these moments, fear dissolves, time collapses, the sense of separation weakens. Not permanently, but enough to change perspective. Self-transcendent individuals are not detached from the world. They are deeply engaged, but their actions are no longer driven by proving, acquiring, or defending. They act because something feels necessary. This is why many self-actualized people are drawn to service, teaching, creation, or contribution, not out of obligation, but inevitability. At this level, success becomes a byproduct, not a goal. happiness becomes a side effect, not a pursuit. Maslow's final insight was perhaps the most uncomfortable. Psychological health does not mean comfort. It means capacity. Capacity to tolerate uncertainty. Capacity to face truth. Capacity to feel deeply without collapse. The fully developed human is not optimized for pleasure, but for meaning. This is the real top of the pyramid. Not endless joy, not perfection, but wholeness. The hero returns, not to impress, but to integrate. They still pay bills, still feel fear, still fail, but they are no longer confused about what matters. Life becomes less about climbing upward and more about standing firmly where you are. And the quiet question that started it all finally changes. Not, is this really it? But, how fully am I here?